We're gonna defeat some orcs and come up with a topic. Can turn it down a little bit. Don't want it to reverberate through the microphone. Alright, I realized that I need to get my thing online, so I'm getting it next month. It's been pushed back. I'm not gonna get a camera because I'm not gonna get a camera right now. I need things like food and also cigarettes and water, but not necessarily in that order. So. All right. Let's see here. Get some more missions. Missions, please. Can I get some missions so I can do some stuff? I'm gonna try to see if I can vacate my inventory right now.
Do you need supplies?
21 plus lifesteal. I don't need that. 21 defense is probably what I do. Legend kit. Tunic. Defense. That's good. So it's 14. Oh, plus 90 deflection. That's awesome. Let's see here.
Oh, you sir. Hello. Not you, sir.
So these amulets. What's equipped is better. About the same different classes. I'll just keep the one I have because I like defense better. Just in case things. Let's see here.
Hello.
Let's see here. Changes equipped minus defense. Minus 43 movement, plus 47 deflection. Get rid of life steal ones. Benjamin kit.
Well, you sir.
All right.
You sir.
And know that. Alright, let's see here. So let's jewel down the tiara. So let's back blade.
Hello.
So that back blade. So that one. Alright. So that identified item. Care about it.
Hello, you say?
Supply of gold. So 50. 6 hit points.
Oh, you say?
30. Box of lost. Let me sell at least half of these. And engraved ivory plate. So long.
What, gentlemen? Where's this Fridays? Fine. What's the day? Fresh meat.
Find point. Do some sort of refining between elements in order to actually equip that. So power is not as good as points. And let's see here. Let's see here.
Hey.
Critical strike is probably cool, but 20 defense is probably a lot better.
Hello, you say?
And with Ivy figurine. And
Hello.
let's see here. Let's get rid of this. Protecting amulet. 21 defense. It's better than 17. Don't care about the identified item. And alright, I have a bunch of space in my inventory now.
Well, you say?
Alright.
What's good? Hello, you say?
See what kind of missions we can get. And we're going to come up with a topic in the process. So, let's talk about something. Let's see here. A lot of people think that there are ways to be able to go around trying to practice something forever and be able to actually get good at it. Believe me, there are ways to know different things. There are ways to be able to move off of one hit if you focus on it completely for a little while, but understandably so, the rest of your reflexes sometimes suffer. The rest of your different bodily functions can suffer. because of certain things that you focus on and calm yourself to do. A lot of kids think they can cram all fucking day and then act like they can they do something at night, or they'll cram all night and right before the test, and they think that they'll do better on the test if they just have that one freaking caffeine drink or something. What they'll realize though is what happens is it becomes like a fast firing synapse in their brain, and when they're actually not doing something that's well, they think that they'll either stay somewhere forever, I guess, or not really stay somewhere forever, but they think that that'll always be the situation that arises, and they'll constantly look for a pattern in that. And that's what I think a lot of people think about when they're thinking about, oh, history repeats itself. It's only because people learn from history, and because of that, of focusing on that fact and focusing your reflexes on a certain thing, that's usually the reasons why people imitate history. So history doesn't actually repeat itself, but to know history is to know what people will do eventually. Understandably so, eventually doesn't mean probably, and probably doesn't mean at all. So a lot of times people get to know themselves. They start to get a version of themselves that's kind of sped up or fast. It's because of you drinking like a caffeinated beverage or something like that, trying to focus on something like a story. You realize that behind those emotional what's the word, triggers, they are sped up. So you'll think you're feeling trembling or some sort of freezing or some sort of cold sometimes, when in actuality you're like burning up or something. It's the reason why I like to move around a little bit more than most people, or at least most people in my house, or the house that I'm currently staying at. A lot of times people don't get a certain reason for themselves, and they don't get that reason, and then they try to find other different avenues, and they didn't understand that their mind had to come to the conclusion itself to be able to figure out whatever answer it was, because that's the way that we have basically evolved over time. Is sometimes you can read to the answer, and sometimes you can meditate to the answer, because the things you've seen, some things that basically your brain is trying to tell you, because it's an organ and it does things. So but it's a muscle moreover than anything else, and all it does as far as synapses, to be able to tell your body and yourself that there are things that you don't understand. And understanding that the situation that people, and this is just for psychology basically, so I'm not really trying to understand absolutely everything at this very moment. So I'm just trying to say that there are a lot of different reasons why people try to put their brand on something. And as they put their brand on something, sometimes they miss a few keys, or they'll miss a few things. Like you'll see a pianist try to stop and then incorporate it into their orchestral pairings, because they've played piano before and they use that skill, but understandably so, it can do really bad things to their fingers sometimes. Using a fast reflex or anything like that on studying, you'll be able to pick something up or to use something, but you'll never be able to attach it to an emotion inside of your head, to be able to instill it as not a reflex, but something that you just know. So that's where you get, I guess, what people would call God-given abilities, like drawing and things like that, because when people see drawings, they try to understand the way that something was drawn.
Well met, hero of Neverwinter.
Alright, I don't care anymore. A lot of times there were different reasons why people understood different things about themselves, and what understanding different things about yourself brings
Harpers have
is
more pressing need for your aid. I appreciate your enthusiasm, and we'd like to be able to send anybody willing to fight. But the challenges we expect to face in the Well of Dragons surpass anything we've seen before. In addition to the Cult of the Dragon's most elite soldiers, we've heard reports of Thayan Red Wizards, devils from the Nine Hells, and dragons swarming the area. Not to mention There's the looming threat of the dragon goddess Tiamat, arriving to lay waste to Faerun. We need this mission to succeed. That's why we're limited to sending the best of the best to the fight. If you have any chance of surviving, and thus contributing to the effort in a meaningful way, we need to make sure you fulfill our qualifications. You'll need quality equipment and plenty of experience dealing with similar high-level threats. Come back when you're a little more qualified.
Oh, there's a lot. Oh, I gotta be level 60. Okay, cool. So a lot of times people don't really understand the way that they're trying to do things, or why they're trying to do things. And that within itself comes up with inconsistencies. The inconsistencies that people try to say, or the people try to make because they want to be able to think faster. Understandably so, if they leave themselves open to a mistake, then what they're doing is slowing themselves down to make someone else make changes in their past. So that's the reason why a lot of times they have a lot of people working on something, like the way that Einstein did things. And a lot of people don't understand how really smart he was, but a lot of times people really don't understand how well protected he was, and the fact that people knew he was smart. So that's also the reasons why he corrected most of the people's work when they were finished. It's like he was the janitor, but he wasn't the janitor in a school where there's a bunch of stuff, and he got the stuff for it because he got the recognition for it because they wanted a celebrity, and a lot of times people make celebrities out of something. So what they don't understand about Einstein was that he wasn't selfish. What he would do is he would tutor kids, and sometimes he tutored less than knowledgeable kids. Sometimes they were either disabled or autistic or something like that, but they had a talent. And when the autistic kid would make something like that, they would try to come up with a formula. And if they come up with a formula and someone corrects it for them, they had to understand that they had to give them credit. A lot of those kids didn't want to give anybody credit for the stuff that they did, so they lost all rights to it, because a lot of times they would realize that that they didn't actually come up with the equation, they were just copying it off of something that they saw. Like notes inside of a teacher's book. So that's usually what happens when people try to make those equations. They were either not cheating, but something they saw that they didn't really understand, they were trying to come up with the formula for, and that's basically kind of what was happening in that situation. So the situation was, it's like they came up with the original equation, but it was off of another equation, basically. So basically the theory of relativity is not just one equation or one problem or one anything. It's a series of equations that came up with the nature of things, like the different planets and stuff like that. People just looking into telescopes, guessing what kind of environment is on something, and realizing the reasons for our solar system's existence, and the amount of power, I guess, that actually flows through this thing, because of not a lot of things happening, like the sun itself recharging, and people don't know that the sun itself can recharge as it lets go of something, because it works on the motion as well as other things. Because that's the reason why sometimes fission reactions are so unstable, is because they feed off of everything. Basically, they don't feed, but every motion that is enacted has also another motion enacted on it. But understandably so, it is in itself a tiny singularity almost. So that's the reason why a lot of times people don't understand things that bend the laws of physics, is because the thing that actually caused that thing. They didn't understand within it lied a kinetic response, or a kinetic energy that enacted something to twirl or act some way. It's like that solar flare that kind of defied whatever people were thinking about what would happen if something came out of the sun or something like that. They had to realize that people don't understand, as something comes out or becomes something, like say if there were dragons a really long time ago and they used to fly everywhere, or used to flap their wings or something like that, they made a motion. So that motion got translated into another planet, because planets communicate, and they always want the life to be able to be somewhere else if it ever dies. Okay, so this is the reason why I know that life goes on, because ionic bonds and different things travel through a lot of different stuff, sometimes even through people. This is the reason why sometimes people get those tingles when their arm is kind of tired or something like that. It's your brain telling you your body's tired, but understandably so, it's also trying to, in the same sense, try to pick it back up so you can keep doing what you need to do. It's an innate response that is learned basically through your nerves and a lot of different things, and that's the reason why you feel the tingles sometimes. And when you feel the tingles for no reason, it could mean you have a lack of circulation, or a blood pressure problem, or any of those things. So realize that, and understand that a lot of times people don't know how to eat junk food. So if they don't know how to eat junk food, sometimes they binge and then don't eat anything else. And that's the reason why sometimes they don't understand that if they binge too much on something without eating something else, what they're doing is they're depriving themselves of nutrients. It's the reason why people think that there's like, oh my god, everything's in everything, guys. Everything is everything. It's like Lauryn Hill. No, it's not like that. Because people sometimes starve themselves for a long time, and they use illicit substances sometimes too. And that's the reason why sometimes people get really skinny, or they're not muscular at all, but they can still pick themselves up, because what they're doing is sometimes men are able to do different things. People don't understand that the way that a lot of times people are able to pick up certain objects or something like that, or with certain frequencies, basically, because that's the way that sand moves and stuff like that. That was the basic touch and go response of a system of mechanisms that can control the amount of gravity that when you're on something. So it's like the theory of relativity is just a theory, because it can be broken in some ways and bent and moved around. That in its case with other things can also happen, like levitating metal for certain instincts. And because of a certain polarity, and because of something is magnetic, because sand in itself holds magnetic parts as far as a certain type of metal that used to be, understandably so, it is kind of like an eviscerated piece of metal almost. Understandably so, it is eviscerated stone. That's the reason why sometimes people don't notice that the sand, or whatever they call it, in the deserts of Africa and the Middle East and northern or southern Europe, or southeast Europe too. That's all made of almost a fine powder because of the certain things that happened there. Those were all different areas that got affected by a series of explosions that happened a long time ago. That's the reason why Chernobyl happened so badly, is because the plants themselves were trying to feed off of something. And so what would happen is every single time something happens, like a nuclear explosion or something like that, that nuclear explosion sends out a vibration. And that vibration holds different things, or carbon. Basically, those carbon atoms are from dead things, basically. Things that have long since gone, basically. So when these nuclear explosions happen, or whenever nuclear explosions happen, what happens to a lot of different things is one part goes through the vibration. So that vibration, or whatever carbon that once was, that isn't anymore, that tried to take shape, because a lot of things people don't realize is that that's the reason why, like, planets try to make things exist. Okay, it's kind of like, that's the reason for the vibration itself. It's the ionic bonds that basically something was holding something. Basically, if you put a container in something. If you put something in a container, okay? Put something in a container, then immediately take it off, and then put your hand in. You'll notice that as you put your hand in the container, you'll understand that the air itself stays inside. There's no wind, even if you have the air conditioner blowing. If the fan's blowing around, you'll start to realize that it's a lot weirder of a sensation, or not weirder of a sensation, but it's like there's calmness where calmness was. So ionic bonds happen all the time, and quantum, and a whole bunch of different other things. That's the basic statement of that. You may think that it's calming the protons and neutrons of different things, but it's the two particles of the atom that make the calmness, because it's the ionic bonds being trapped, and so the ionic bonds themselves leave the container, and when you put your hand in, everything else seems calm. It's like seeing those bubbles at the bottom of the ocean, because there are bubbles at the bottom of the ocean just as much as there are bubbles at the bottom of the river. So as the river rolls, there are things called as bubbles, and when they start to move because of the pressure under something, basically what people have to realize about that stuff is the river is actually about 15 to 20 feet lower than what they would actually see it as. So if everything became calm, the river would actually sink down about 10 to 15 feet. People don't actually understand that. And if they don't understand that, then they won't understand the fact that the oceans themselves are a lot deeper. So even if there is any pull at all, it doesn't matter how much pressure you put on something, or saying that, oh my god, New Orleans is going to sink, guys. No, it's not. Trust me, it's 15 feet above sea level. That's the reason why the river still flows that way. It's not because of the elevation, it's because of its propelling itself to a source or to a mouth. The mouth of the river, the Mississippi, is basically what propels almost the entire thing. It's like, basically, you have to ferment a wine to be able to put, to be able to have product. So the mouth of the river creates the flow, which is the product. But you have to realize that every single time it flows, it comes in from a different source. So as it comes through from whatever lake it's coming through, and through whatever underground tunnels or whatever it comes through, or through a mouth of a certain lake, you have to understand that every single part of that thing is being replaced as it's going in and as it's coming out. So basically, it's like there is no movement on those lakes, but understandably so, as it comes through the mouth of the I don't know what it's called, the situation thing, the opening, basically the beginning of the river, or I don't know what it is, but obviously but obviously that's basically the reasoning behind a lot of people understanding or thinking they understand their elevation and how it changes. People think that the curvature of the earth has to do with a lot of it, but what they have to understand is the earth doesn't experience curvature. That's the reason why water itself rises and goes lower, and sometimes within its own minerals has a change in wavelength or wave girth or anything like that, So or crest, something like that. I don't know. It has a lot to do more with the minerals that are inside of the water than than anything else. So basically, it doesn't experience curvature, but it knows that it's curved. So basically, that's the reason why people don't understand, is as it curves, it sees itself. It's kind of like one of those little whatchamacallit, what's those measurement thingies? What are they called? It's like one of those little spinny things. You spin the little flat thing that has all those little sections of cut pieces, and it's like a little wind chime almost, or a wind dangly thing basically, and it shows you the way that the curvature of the earth believes it is. It experiences things in motion, so it knows that it's in motion. But understandably so, it doesn't know exactly how much motion it's in, because that's the reason for matter itself understanding something and still being able to move in a certain direction, and other things not being able to get in the way to be able to mess with it. Because understandably so, there's a certain ionic bond, I guess, between the kinetic energy of what it's seeing that it's doing, and that's the reason why the ionic bonds never usually change within the Earth. Because of the fact that let's see, I don't know, whatever. It's okay. But the fact of the matter is that the reason the ionic bonds don't change inside of the Earth is because a lot of times are the reasons, and as it pertains to my original thing, which is believing that a certain gradual incline, or that a certain, not a certain gradual incline, blah, I'm going upstairs, I'm a dumbass, a certain gradual incrementation could be alleviating to stress, basically, because of a different thought pattern. Basically, that's what people do sometimes. And like, to be able to alleviate stress, sometimes they just focus on a number or focus on something, but they don't understand that there's nothing relaxing about it, because they're not losing their stress. They're basically just trying to distract their mind long enough to be able to go through some sort of what kind of boredom, I guess, or stress that they have, because they believe that the feeling will fade. And that's what happens sometimes when kids have a panic attack or something like that. You're not supposed to touch them. You're not supposed to be near them. You're not supposed to ask them what's wrong, because that's the reason why, is because they need silence to be able to realize that the voice in their head is just the thought pattern that's making something, to be able to make them be able to understand what they're trying to do. So basically, if you see someone having a panic attack at some point, don't try to yell, don't try to do anything, don't try to do anything. Get someone who's a professional at something and tell them what happened, or tell them what you saw. So if you see someone having a panic attack, the only thing you're supposed to do, if you ever have contact with them, if you ever know them or ever know anything about them, tell them just to breathe in their nose and out their mouth. Breathe in your nose and out your mouth, because that's how you don't have a panic attack. Obviously, there are a lot of times where I didn't take that advice, but not a lot of times, but a few times where I wasn't able to figure out that advice, and then what happened, or what wound up happening, was I wound up making myself look like an idiot. So,
Protector's Enclave needs your help.
all right, obviously people need my help. So I have to join a guild to be able to get more missions. Alright, so a lot of times when people realize certain incrementations of thought, when they're going through some sort of problem in their life, it's a lot harder to get back to those places of tranquility, or those places of lack of thought, or anything like that. And they understand that they get a song stuck in their head, because their mind wants to remember what they felt or how they felt it, no matter if they're trying to make a mental note of it or not, because your mind protects you, because it's a muscle, and that's what it does. It remembers things in times of need or times of emergency, for you to be able to get out of harm's way, or in any situation out of a way of a particular thing, I guess. So, understanding a certain situation, what you need to understand and realize is, a lot of times people don't get a certain fluctuation of something. A fluctuation of what's the word? When another mineral, like say a mineral from outer space or something like that, crash lands on something, what it does is it creates something, because the Earth itself back in the day was probably, I'd say that it was in the green area, but that green area was volatile because of the certain funguses that existed during the primordial era. It's the reason why today we have poisonous plants and a lot of different things. It's what they remember, and it's what they evolved from. But it's like, plants are like, they realize and remember everything that a single thing has come before it, because it's almost like a hive mind, but it's technically like a CD case. It remembers that there was you remember that there was a CD in there, okay? You remember the title of that CD, but you don't exactly remember what was on every song, because you haven't listened to it in some odd years. That's basically how it's like. So the trees, they evolve in certain ways because they don't know what they are, okay? Seeing as how matter technically doesn't know what it is, trees have life but don't know what they are. They know what they do, but they don't know what they are because it's encoded in their DNA. And yes, trees have DNA, and they move around a lot sometimes. Understandably so. That's probably what's going to happen when I'm gauging that our atmosphere might actually start changing. And the reason why everyone's coming up with all these movies and stuff like that is they believe that certain temperatures release certain gases, and they thought that's the reason why there was a high concentration of CO2. But understandably so, it's probably because of our what's the word? Our environment is changing because of a lot of different things enacting themselves. Like it may not seem like it's happening because of something else, but understandably so, it's nothing that the humans actually did, or anything that has ever been done. Because if you didn't notice that, eventually people realized something. It's that our Earth, and its core and in itself, may not have been lava, but technically it's so hot down there because of all the motion, all the tectonic motion, is because of okay, the realization of tectonic motion. Okay, all right, the realization of tectonic motion is that every single part of our planet that moves, okay, every single part of our planet that moves makes some sort of loud noise, and that's basically what that was. That huge boom sound, that was tectonic noise. It was basically the sound of a tectonic plate breaking the sound barrier, and that was the sonic boom it made all over the world, basically. So that's what it was. So, but also too, you have to understand that a lot of times the Earth itself goes through a lot of changes. So you might not hear the boom until about 20 years after it actually happens, because it moves so fast. So basically, like, the last time I think it happened was probably about 1998, 1999, something like that. And that's the reason why I think a lot of times they thought that the Earth was going to crumble, I guess. Not exactly crumble, but was going to be some sort of messed up, and they needed to back up files. So a lot of times that got leaked to be able to tell people that there was something they needed to prepare for. And that's where Y2 came from. Basically, they thought that the position of their satellites might be different because of people talking and saying stupid shit, like the New Orleans is below sea level and all that bullshit. So that's basically what happened, is people through certain inconsistencies thought that the Earth would end in 2012 because of certain things that happened in 1999, because of certain things that happened in a lot of different things, because they thought that the orbit of something changes with the Earth. Understandably so, the Earth itself's orbit never changes. The reason why it never changes is because the bonds of something and being able to be in a certain pattern is to be able to be connected with the Earth still, basically. And that's the reason why you can still send those signals down and a bunch of different stuff. So, the ionic bonds, which is, Chinese did quantum teleportation. Understandably so, they didn't do it with an actual object. They did it with atoms, or what's the word? A lot of times, what people didn't understand about atoms is that they do that all the time, even without any chips near them. So basically, that's the reason why people don't realize that when they're in the Earth's orbit, that's the reason why a lot of things fuse together. Because the ionic bonds are few and far between. So that's basically what happens when metals fuse together that have the same common ionic bond or common proton or neutron number. It's the reason why they all become part of the same thing, and sometimes they change colors because of different things like that too.
There is no time for small talk.
God damn it, this woman won't give me a mission. Alright, a lot of times, when you go to, certain different, what's the word, or when you try to talk about certain different, time periods, what you'll have to do is to understand the physics of every single time period. You'll have to understand that the temperature itself is inactively different. Like, there was more oxygen, because sometimes what happens is there's so much oxygen-rich environment, because that's what happens, basically, is the reason why a lot of different stuff happens in California that people don't understand. It's because of all the wildlife that is actually trying to release oxygen to be able to go to other plants. That's what happens sometimes. But a lot of times it's enacted by old landfills and stuff like that got covered up and turned into dirt, or maybe ground up or something like that. It could have been a landfill back in the day of, let's see, the trash of different people and stuff like that. They'd understand that there were a lot of different times where people didn't take care of their trash in the old days. Everything stank because of the certain wind patterns that there were around, and everyone either smoked cigarettes, drank, or did something that was really, really different. Because that's also the reasons why I think they drank more mead products in the Vikings era.
I've discovered something valuable.
I really level 60. I gotta go do some missions, man.
I heard this was the city to hire hero. Me. Why, I'm only the best sea captain to ever sail the trackless sea.
It's the reason why a lot of times people drank nothing but sweet honey, is because they wanted to give off the scent of honey, of a honey sort of thing, and they wanted to kind of make their own perfumes or some sort of thing, but they didn't understand the different chemicals. And what they had to understand is those different chemicals sometimes were volatile. So, like blubber, whale blubber or something like that, or some fish scales were actually poisonous, and that's what they didn't know. That a lot of times the blowfish itself is an ancient fish. That's the reason why it shares the distinction of having a poison, because there were a lot of fish that were poisonous back in the day, and people don't understand that the more poisonous animals there were, basically the older their DNA is. So that's the reason why they like to collect different fish. They're not looking for any viruses in it. They usually synthesize a bunch of different versions to be able to send to different communities that have lifeguards and a whole bunch of different places like that, and to be able to send to different biological places to biological researchers to take the poison out. Like, say if someone has a poison sting or something like that, and they need it, or they need it because they think that it pooled in their blood somewhere and is causing them pain. And we're gonna not respond to that. I'm gonna decline, because every single time I try to do a mission, it's like someone has to be in your group for you to do that. I'm pretty smart, but a lot of times people don't understand that. Just gonna leave him to it. He's probably better off than I am.
The rebels are everywhere. Watch out for ambushes.
Alright, so that's basically the reasons why I think that a lot of people don't realize that what they take in sometimes is probably old poisons sometimes too. Is because we've all tried to eradicate certain things in the air, but a lot of times what we do is take in chemicals that can make us sick. Like the stuff they use, like minorly sick, give you a stomach ache every once in a while if you breathe it in or something like that. People have no idea that sometimes the lungs are actually directly connected to a lot of different things inside your body. It's the reason why it's actually shaped like that, the little kind of root kind of stuff. It's not really like roots, but it's like hollow corpuscles basically, and it actually takes in a lot of different stuff. And they don't understand that sometimes they're standing too close to an air conditioner, or and it has a freon leak, or too close to something, and that's what happens. And the reason why people don't realize that a lot of times they do things and say things, and the realization of fact is that a lot of times when there are people that don't understand something, they don't realize that not understanding something is the reason why they're not getting the answer. Like not understanding a certain fact, or understanding certain evidence all right, certain evidence of a certain what's the word? Contagion, I guess, or I don't know what it's called, but it's probably got, I probably got it right though. So all right, so a lot of times when you think you have it all figured out, you'll think that you're calm or something, but you have to understand that your brain goes through a lot of different other certain situations that like say you get up from something and you realize that your arm hurts, or you're getting up from something and you realize you have to crack your neck. It's not because of anything that actually happens, like some sort of like superstitious thing. It's because a lot of times people don't realize that they're predisposed to certain what do you call it, certain kinds of muscle and bone changes. Like, if you don't stretch enough, your arm will stick in a certain position. Well, what happens a lot is because the fluid itself is trying to leave that so that it can so it can help you rest. And that's a lot of times when people lay down, they have to crack their hips or something like that. Not really crack their hips, but realize a certain fact, and so a lot of times there are certain realizations of fact that you start to realize after those certain pieces start to heal. Is the thought itself of something happening, basically, that you didn't like, was your fear of what would happen to you if you got into a situation. Focusing on that fact is probably what got you there, but understanding that you were either A, not really suicidal, but or B, you thought that someone had told someone about something, like say like a spy in the 20s or something like that, they were constantly suspicious of every single person around them. Suspicious that people were trying to steal things or take things from them. And when they were suspicious of everyone around themselves, they took certain measures that made their brain focus on what was danger. So when they took different measures to be able to do those things, or be able to be where they needed to be in certain situations of a lot of what's the word, let's see,
This is my place. Get your own questions. Right. What kind of questions do you have for old Jerry? Simple, because I ain't got nothing. These are only interested in you if you got something they can steal.
Alright,
used to have some stuff. Real nice stuff that I found. That was back when I had a cozy place down in the sewers. But then some blasted adventurers bursted in shouting about loot and took my stuff. Baldur's Gate! That's where the flaming fists come from. Surviving! What do you think? 'Cause I got nowhere to live. Lost gun!
Alright. So, a lot of times in different situations, people would try to, in a lot of different situations, people would try to get to something. Not realizing that a place was dangerous because of somebody saying something, but then not realizing the levels, they didn't want to say it to people to make them, like in times like these, like old, medieval times, basically. That's what would happen sometimes, is when the dude was saying it was terrible for people to go inside, it meant that there was radiation poisoning. Because of a certain leak that happened a long time ago, they used to time these things correctly, and that's how they were able to come up with those plots. There was more than one, obviously, but because they were able to constantly position certain things, and they didn't commission anyone to actually make them. But what they did was they commissioned people who knew a lot of things, and they used times to be able to, or dates to be able to predict times. So they would notice as they went through dates and times and certain scrolls and certain things that were hidden in certain places. They had to understand that that those scrolls themselves were in some ways outdated. So what that happened sometimes is people would get ready for something to happen, and then it wouldn't happen. Like say people who thought that something would change in a certain way, and something didn't happen. Basically, they didn't realize is that through a certain number of mineral taking or eating certain minerals, what would happen is they would all suggest an idea. Okay, that's the reason why sometimes someone would try to say something and then everyone would agree on it. So as they tried to agree on it, they would make basically this pact. Okay, this pact, as they were all eating the same elements eating the same elements, sometimes eating the same elements or feeding off of the same kind of thing. Like say you eat a chicken that doesn't taste that good, everyone gets food poisoning. That's what happens. A chicken that doesn't taste that good because it's been in the refrigerator for like a month and doesn't taste as good as it used to because it makes your stomach a little bit groggy sometimes because of if you leave it in there for too long, it can do that because of the corpuscles that expand because of all the cold air. All right. That's the reason why I don't think they'll be able to come up with the mammoth anytime soon, but understandably so they'll be able to derive new techniques that will be able to get those different pieces and be able to come up with more docile animals. So that's the reason why. But understandably so, it's still legal. So in America it is, because also we don't have the specific type of technologies to be able to bring those things back to life because of us respecting and doing things with religion. So a lot of times go to Tower District, see if I can do something. Maybe I'll take this off of me. This is a piece of carpet. Awesome. People didn't understand that when they went through these certain processes of thought, what would happen sometimes is they'd start to think of the same idiom or the same thing or the same kind of riddle, and it had a lot to do with people doing different stuff or saying different things. Sometimes what they would do is they'd say a riddle or something like that to be able to remind themselves of something they thought of a long time ago. Understandably so, sometimes people don't get to those ideas because of the time that's existed between them, I guess. You have a synapse, basically. It fired, and then it got replaced because of certain different types of memories that you have within your own body. Memories of an action. It's the reason why sometimes people are able to do those actions really, really quickly. Those Chinese and those martial artists, basically, that become cooks because they basically trained themselves to be able to make up moves, and they did it because it makes them better at reflexive cooking. And the reason why those guys at the hibachi grills sometimes do those amazing feats and are able to catch those things because they can gauge the physics of something without having to look at it. So a lot of times when you go through those certain motions with your own with yourself, you start to make an assumption about something, the way something will move because of the way that you'll affect it. Understandably so, you can't make any assumption on that, because if you make an assumption on that, you'll be trying to gauge whether or not that thing is going to land here or here, because you'll see something, you don't understand that the kids who don't have enough practice or people who are not experts at something don't realize they don't have the proper reflexes to be able to make those things. Be able to make those processes in their mind. Be able to do it that way every single time, because it takes years of practice to be able to do that stuff. That's the reason why Shaolin monks are so cool. And there are a lot of times though that even Shaolin monks can't do something, because of them practicing for so long. They have an innate reflex of doing something or being able to do something. Like, say a Shaolin monk isn't allowed to go in certain places because of what his reflexes are. He'd be predisposition to violence if something ever broke out. So he just, like, that's the reason why they don't allow sometimes Shaolin monks that are practicing to go into bars and drink, because a lot of times what would happen is people would mess with them. Like, people would mess with different Shaolin monks and try to get them, egg them on into fights, and then they would get into fights and then beat 30 people in the fucking face. Strong people, like 5 to 6 times their size. and granted, Shaolin monks aren't that big, but 5 to 6 times a Shaolin monk size, mass and weight, is probably like freaking the dude is the giant, the wrestler, the giant guy, that guy. They could take out one Shaolin monk could take out an entire pro wrestler with literally no use. So any pro wrestler that ever thinks that they're actually the greatest fighter in the world, they'll understand that no one ever does Shaolin monks. I've never seen a wrestler ever imitate a Shaolin monk ever. Ever. Because all of them believe that they're warriors from Anglo-Saxon times and stuff like that, Viking warlords and Arabian Knights and stuff like that. No one has ever in the entire history of wrestling ever tried to be like a Shaolin monk. So I think it's a respect, actually, because they don't even want to try, because they know that it takes 10 to 15 years to actually be able to do stuff. Being able to research and understand one action that you do, to be able to understand a reflex and then be able to change it extremely quickly. There are a lot of times where those kinds of people, Shaolin monks and different people that were fighters, would understand different philosophies and be able to understand different equations for it. And that's also the reasons for a lot of different celebrities that would gather different maths from a lot of different places, and then they'd put their name on it because of people wanting to keep their identity a secret. Because if they ever decided to become a mathematician, they knew they'd actually become a celebrity. So that's what would happen sometimes, is people would keep quiet about different things because they were students, basically, doing things that they thought they should do, and understanding certain equations from things they witnessed in nature. That's the reason why I like America, because they decided to do a bunch of different stuff, and that's a lot of times people don't understand is being able to understand certain things is being able to understand certain things like and also a lot of times they would allow people in bars that not like old times. That's the reason why I like the Hangover 1 or Hangover 2 so much, is because they forgot about different things. It's almost like that's what they would do with alcohol sometimes and different drugs. Not what they would do with different drugs, but what they would do is they would synthesize different drugs, take out the certain piece that gave the or not piece, but take out the certain chemical that made the side effect, because of a lot of times they don't realize that the additive itself, the mineral, is kind of volatile. But understandably so, that's the reason why people have taken out a lot of different side effects, but also too why they've kept them in, because they don't want people to abuse pharmaceuticals. So there are a lot of times where Shaolin monks and a lot of different people practicing botany, because there are botanists that are Shaolin monks. Lots of botanists that are Shaolin monks. But understandably so, what they would do sometimes is they would take out or synthesize the piece to be able to understand whether or not it fired a synapse. And that's what caused the dopamine sensors to be able to help them with whatever symptom they had, whether it be cholera, whether it be any sort of thing. What would happen sometimes is people would try to make a differentiation of or make a tea with it, I guess, or like a powder or a rub or something like that. And that's what would happen sometimes. So sometimes what they would do with different English traditions is with certain potions or different elixirs or something like that would happen with different people basically just doing stuff. They wouldn't realize that the whatever potion they were using or different things like that would have a certain mineral effect. So basically it would kind of make your body a little bit heavy. And that mineral effect is an actual science. If you don't understand it, it's called it's not called geology, because it studies the effects of minerals on our body. So it's called what's it called? Back in the time they called it all alchemy, because it's not because they didn't understand it, it's just because they needed further study. So a lot of times that's the reason why they'll deem something alchemy, and then call it forbidden, or like forbidden magic or anything like that. Like you'll see forbidden magic on a lot of different templates on different things because it's forbidden to do because they don't understand it, and they have to do more research to be able to understand those things. But understanding those researches and how they keep them secret is literally with every single part of a whole bunch of different things that they've shared with their states and their cultures. So even if it's ever stolen or everything like that, someone knows to be able to basically steal it back, kind of. And also there are a lot of times where people, what they do sometimes is they'll like in those times where you see people drinking tea in something, like in one of those things, like someone would fight or something like that, or someone would try to get someone to fight. What they would do is they would drug their tea. The person themselves would build a huge what's the word, resistance to it. So they would just be calm, sitting down and acting like they never drunk the tea, but the person would start to get an uncontrollable twitch or something, and then that uncontrollable twitch would be like, oh my god, it's poison, I have to run, sort of thing like that. So that's what would happen in a lot of old Asian things like that, when there was ever a spy that they knew was a double agent and was trying to steal information and sell it to another country. So that's also the reasons why a lot of times people would get up and fight and shoot guns, but they wouldn't shoot the person that was sitting right there because they shared a drink with them. So they showed them a sign of respect most of the times, but they didn't know that that person actually drugged them and gave them a certain mineral unbalance. And that's the reason why a lot of times the minerals themselves had a lot more effect on people, because they didn't eat as much food as they did nowadays. So a lot of times people would starve themselves over serious times to be able to concentrate themselves, and if they didn't have full concentration, they start to get the trembles because they were literally starving themselves to death so much. And that's the reason why sometimes they would actually move those monks and those places and those different places in China and in most of Asia and a lot of different places to be able to protect certain informations that they knew was only entitled to people with licenses. They would look for your papers, your passport, whatever it was, because there were passports back in the day, but they didn't understand that that sometimes they would be fraudulently made, and a lot of times their information, or not a lot of times, but sometimes what they would do is they would set up certain situations for that person to run through, seeing as how it's like you know that person, every single time you see something, you change in direction, right? In skiing or something like that. That's the way that people don't understand. That's basically what they would do sometimes if they had that mineral in their body. They try to find water or something like that, and if the water itself wasn't as good, they'd be like, oh my god, I don't taste the minerals, I can't taste it. So that's what they would do sometimes, is they mix their water or their fountains basically with certain proteins. They got from either a cow's marrow, or an actual cow's fat milk. It's the reason why sometimes people would actually get a better situation, I guess. And then that's what would happen with a certain mineral, is whatever it would do sometimes is if the person went up to drink from the fountain, it would actually enact that mineral more. So it's the reason why that people would call that's where the spell of eternal madness came from, actually. People would get mad over certain situations, and that mineral being still in their body, if they ever made a piece of it, put it on their brain or within their certain things, they didn't understand that if they never did that or never wanted to do that, what they would understand is they can be completely and utterly healthy. So, and then they would say that the spell hasn't been enacted, there's something wrong or something like that. Basically, it was a mineral enacting some sort of chemical change within the brain that fired synapses to be able to make, and that's what kind of caffeine can do. And in overdoses, sometimes people would actually have heart attacks and die. So that's what would happen sometimes. And a lot of times, though, that if they didn't realize a person's physical or health state at all, what would happen sometimes is people would actually get completely taken to jail for killing someone. And most of the time, people didn't realize that they were actually making a crime by actually trying to poison someone. And a lot of times they go to jail afterwards because of the way that they tried to protect a certain secret. And a lot of times they didn't understand that, well, not they, but the people that did it didn't understand that they were basically setting up something that would instill a mistrust or a hatred within certain cities and within certain places. And that's why a lot of times they didn't understand that like in World War II, the reason why they bombed Nagasaki and different things like that is because that's not where they thought the ninjas were, but it's where they thought that whatchamacallit, a certain place of knowledge was, I guess. I don't know, because they thought that because of war situations they just wanted to get rid of that thing, but understandably so they used too powerful of situations to be able to do that, and too powerful of products like the atom bomb they used, and a lot of times they didn't know how much damage it did until they realized exactly how much damage it did. And that's the reason why a lot of times people didn't understand that there were certain reasons why people didn't realize a certain fact, I guess. And through that certain fact, they didn't understand that there were tons and tons of carpet bombings. And then after that, there were huge amounts of different things. I think it had to do with a lot of times they didn't understand that that those pieces, basically, there were already radioactive pieces that were underneath Nagasaki, I think. And also, too, they had to understand that that's the only reason why it would make that huge of an explosion. So they had to realize that if they made that explosion, I think, then what they didn't understand is that explosion, basically, it's like lightning almost. Sometimes is when the Earth itself has some sort of irradiated piece, it tries to push it out. It tries to make something from it, and it likes to push it out. And that's the reason why you see that bellowing Earth sometimes, because it thinks that it's some sort of irradiated piece. And then a lot of times what happened is the Earth itself would enact something because it believed something to be irradiated, but when it wasn't, it was just water basically gushing out of something. And then eventually they would realize is that's what caused some of the floods sometimes, is because of certain pieces enacting themselves because of what's the word, ancient vines, basically, sometimes too, that could literally even break down walls. So you have to understand that if the Great Wall, I guess, the movie itself, was ever even real, they wouldn't have been fighting lizards. They probably would have been fighting trees. It would be more rational for them to be actually fighting vegetables than it would be to be fighting lizards. Yep. So when you go back to a certain situation in your life, that certain situation can be either fast or fast or visceral or calm. Basically, there are 3 different kinds of synapse firing sometimes, and that's usually the reasons why: fast, visceral, or calm. It's like either you're doing something to where you're not visceral, you're doing something to where you're trying to be some sort of visceral, or you're trying to be calm, basically. And that's kind of what happens when you learn to fight when you're a little kid. And that's what happened to me when I was a little kid too. Sometimes is I learned a move, and these 3 kids were jumping me, and instead of hitting the kids that were punching me, what I did was I punched the little kid in the stomach right below the ribs. And if I would have hit him in the ribs, I could have broken him. But I didn't, because he was being a little ass. He was trying to figure out whether or not I was badass or not, or something like that. I pretty much showed him, because I was 5 years old and there was 3 of the dudes trying to punch me. And a lot of times there were certain situations though that people didn't understand, that like people can suggest things sometimes to people. Like little kids can be so manipulative sometimes. They can be so manipulative sometimes, and they can manipulate their friends into doing things they want them to do. And understanding that, they have to understand that there were a lot of times where I understood something, and I really understood a lot of different stuff. Was most of the time when I was a little kid, there were a lot of people that thought that I was retarded, basically, or autistic, because they didn't understand that those 2 words never thing never go like basically retarded means an old English phrase, okay? It's you piss me off in a bar, okay? When I'm trying to drink my drink, right? What they would do is they would take searing hot tar and they would put it on their body. They would put it on that person's body, they would hold them down and make them put it all over their chest. And then they would take chicken feathers, right? Chicken feathers, and then they would put it on their chest with the searing hot tar. Then they would make them walk outside to the city limits, and then they would send someone to go kill them. And that's what retarded means, okay? That's exactly what retarded means, because it's an old English phrase, and I know it to be, even though they don't say it anymore. It's like the experience of it's like the equivalent of someone calling a I don't want to compare it to anything because it's probably just that bad. But that's basically what they would do. They would be, do you want to be retarded and feathered and then have to fight for your life? Because that's what would happen. That's basically what they would do. They didn't know what they would do because sometimes they would be brought to jail right afterwards and then realize that that person's either completely gone from that city or they're dead. A lot of times there weren't a lot of things to be able to, and that's a lot of times what a lot of old people from England actually did to a lot of people in other countries sometimes because of the things they did. They didn't understand that's what happened to them sometimes, and the reasons why a lot of people themselves had to realize is sometimes they had burn victims, and those burn victims did something terrible or lied to someone in a certain way because they didn't understand the situation and they didn't stay out of it because they didn't know anything. But understandably so, that's where retarded came from. And also the N-word, which I know the N-word, it came from when there was a massacre in Italy. It came from when there was a massacre in Italy, and they took boats out to the middle of the Dead Sea, dropped off all the dead bodies, and literally poisoned the entire Niger River. That's what happened. It's literally what happened. Because there were so many wars and so many fucked up places, that's where they would bury their dead, at sea. And they had no idea that it would just go completely away from it, and then the boats would just fall apart, and there was a dam in front of the Niger River for a very long time before anyone was able to get it out, because they had no idea whether or not those people had cholera or some sort of disease, and they had no idea what kind of diseases they could get. A lot of times they would send their animals to go pick it up because they didn't even understand, but the animals didn't get as hurt as the humans, and that's the reason why those people have those animal masks on sometimes. I knew it was something, and that's the reason why I think that there's a lot of different reasons why the N-word is so fucking terrible. And I don't say it without any sort of thing, because I know that it is very terrible. And where people hide their dead is usually where people don't realize that if there is some sort of irradiation or some sort of thing or some sort of anything that's sitting around them at all, like what is it, not an object, an irradiated piece or some sort of like Tesla coil or something like that. Yeah, they can be someone that just gets right back up after they're dead and doesn't realize that they're completely and utterly brain dead. And that's where you get a lot of times where people would use drugs to be able to stop people from thinking, and then use them sometimes as different things. So basically, anything in the entire book of anything can be used, and I keep trolling around in circles, as a weapon. So realize that happens. The more they start to realize, the more they start to do things, the more they realize that everything they use can be volatile. So zombies are real in a certain form, but also too, if you don't realize that as they start to move or as they start to do things, whatever it is starts to mutate, and they start to imitate things around them. And that's the reason for the story about Blanca and all that different stuff, is your skin starts to get green because technically you're already dead, but you're still in your body because that's what happens. And then people don't understand that that's basically the reason why people actually get exorcisms sometimes, is because they didn't realize that they just lost their memory completely. Because they were once a certain thing that that was alive and is now completely and utterly unalive. A lot of times people wouldn't understand certain things and they wouldn't realize that people were a certain way, I guess. And what they didn't realize is a lot of times that science itself just wasn't that far of being able to tell someone something. So I guess what happens sometimes is the stillness within your lungs. People don't really understand this or understand anything about it. But what sometimes happens is your lungs themselves, as you start to change, or as people get revived after like 2 or 3 hours of being covered in ice, what happens to them is their personality changes because they've gone through a traumatic experience. The personality changes because they become more somber, in a somber tone, because they believed that someone would actually save them, and they didn't understand that they didn't need it. Sometimes you don't understand that, and the reasons why you get so excited about things is because you're on some sort of mineral caffeine, I guess, and that's the reason why a lot of times when someone has experienced a certain traumatic experience, no matter how much caffeine they drink, they're still the same kind of level. They're still the same level of emotion sometimes. And they're able to focus on something. It's because, not because they've gone through a traumatic experience, but they've realized something traumatic. Like seeing the Twin Towers fall, or something like that, and realizing how many people got fucking murdered, basically. But understandably so, if they didn't realize that science itself was a little bit further along, sometimes in some areas, like most countries, including America, and a lot of different Virgin Islands, and a bunch of different people knew how to use different techniques with certain minerals to be able to keep someone alive and on life support. To be able to get to go into their brain, to be able to cut through a certain amount of bone, and then activate something, or try to activate a synapse by releasing a certain charge, basically, inside of their brain, and waking it up. It's the reason why all their tools are basically magnetic, because that's what happens inside of the brain afterwards. Is they basically kind of hook you up to different pulsars, and those pulsars themselves send signals to different muscles. And they don't understand that's what happens sometimes, is people don't really get it. And life itself moves on, and it keeps going. So what happens sometimes, though, is people don't really understand why it happens or why it does things. They don't really know that that a lot of times what they did is they passed out for a while. Like, say for instance, I what's the word? I went to jail one time, and a dude opened the door, and I realized that I was just breathing nothing but carbon dioxide. The sudden rush of oxygen itself, because this is all science, because these are all pranks that guards actually pull on people, because they know science, and it's funny sometimes. It's not that funny, it's kind of fucking retarded, and I hate him. They realize that once you breathe your own carbon dioxide for a while, because sometimes they have vents in there that they shut off to be able to help people, to be able to make sure they're bringing their own carbon dioxide and they stay calm. If they're not staying calm, what they'll do is they'll wait for a while, and then they'll open up the cell after the person has expelled whatever sort of thing they've expelled. The rush of oxygen to the brain will actually cause people to pass out. And that's what the science behind that one time I went to jail and then decided that I needed to pass out. They didn't decide that I needed to pass out. That was a douchebag that didn't really know anything. But yeah, that's what happens. It's a science experiment that happens, and people are going to understand that the reasons why the jails are going to get better is because they're going to leave them in there for a little while longer, and they're not going to try to help them because they're stupid. All they're going to have to do is wait until they expel all their energy, and once they expel all their energy, all they have to do is wait a few seconds, tell them they're coming in, and then open the door. They'll pass out, and then they'll be able to put them in whatever they need to put them in. So if they ever want to move a different person from prison to prison, like Charlie Manson or anybody that's stupid as fuck, like hardcore stupid as fuck, then they can use that technique and it'll work every time. Understandably so, he'll try to fake it and not realize that he's still passed out. Because a lot of times people have sleep paralysis when that happens. And that's what happens a lot of times when people close their doors a lot. I have vents that lead out to stuff like that, and sometimes I open a window. But that's not the reason why I open the window, because sometimes I realize different things. It is an hour and 20 minutes into this, and I'm still going. But realize that certain brain synapses that fire, they sort of make a certain thing for something that I didn't do. Basically, I went to prison for that, or jail. Basically, it wasn't prison, because if I went to prison, then they would have kept me for a lot longer, and then had that trial thing, and then realizing that everything was fake and they were lying. So, all right, we're gonna I'm not gonna say that out loud. It was only for me. All right, a lot of times people didn't realize that that they were making a fool of themselves sometimes, and because of a certain person knowing how to manipulate oxygen in people's lungs because of them saying things, they could actually take the oxygen out of their freaking lungs and not really take it out of their lungs, but cover it up with something else. Basically, cup their hand and make sure they breathe into it, and then as they uncup it, they put it over the thing of their mouth, and then what it will do is make them breathe in immediately, and then it will replace the oxygen that they have wherever they have it with CO2, and it can make them faint. And that's where all those movies came from, with all that like chloroform to you? That's the joke, basically. It's a terrible fucking joke, and it's stupid, but that people had techniques that were able to do that, and they would cup their hand in a certain manner, and that's how they were able to make people fall asleep. Sometimes whenever they would say stab someone or something like that in prison or anything like that. It's the reason why sometimes they would be passed out, and then they would say they have an allergy to blood, and they would try to act like they're doctors because they're stupid. So realizing that there are a lot of times where people don't realize stuff, and it's really stupid, it's fucked up as hell, and it's dumb, but that's what they would do sometimes, is because they were like, and if someone did something extremely bad, then sometimes they wouldn't let it happen. They would try to be around it to basically stop it from ever happening again. So, and not exactly around it. They would actually try to be like try to keep an eye on it as much as possible to be able to understand that if it ever happened again, they would whatchamacallit, they will be able to be there and make sure that people can get emergency systems and stuff like that. So there are a lot of times where people get retrained and people are able to understand certain things like that, basically to understand certain things. I don't know, just to be able to understand something. But realization of fact is that a lot of times people didn't understand where they were coming from, I guess, or where a certain person was actually coming from, trying to be able to make sure that they could be nice the whole time and they should be treated with respect. And a lot of times I felt as though that I wasn't, because I really wanted to be able to what's the word, I really wanted to be able to have a good experience there, and a lot of times I didn't, because I found out certain things that people were doing to be able to do or make sure that they could do some certain things, but also understandably so, they didn't realize that they weren't doing anything, and they didn't understand what they were doing at all, because that's the science behind it, and I've studied it actually, because I've understand the reasons why goats themselves used to play dead a lot of times in nature, because they only had one hit, one move basically. So they developed a certain other move basically that would happen after they hit someone. They would fall over and then die and act like they were dead until someone would try to nudge them, and then they get up and run away, or they get up and do something. But that in itself enacted something, and that's the reason why their legs stayed out that much, because they're literally trying to act that they got petrified. And then animals would stay away from them because it looked like they were poisonous. So it's an evolutionary trait that happens, but understandably so. A lot of people don't understand that that they do have an evolutionary trait, but they don't really understand the mechanics behind it, and it takes a lot of different kind of minerals to be in your system to be able to have that happen. So there actually needs to be a certain drug in your system, and a lot of times it has to do with weed and probably a certain type of vegetable. So not exactly weed, but any sort of slowing down mineral, basically, in the blood. Not really a slowing down chemical, but a mineral itself, and that usually calms people down. And if they're ever like suggested, or they have a soft spot in their brain, and you suggest something, they'll actually pass out. So, like, that's what happens usually to people who have gotten stabbed or hurt in some way. They feel a nerve pinch and they try to vacate their body, or try to vacate some sort of thing, or sometimes they just shit themselves. But that's what happens. It's basically people who stay in prison for very long periods of time. They are changed forever because of the certain situations that happen inside of prison, and the people who change them are the people who who do a bunch of different stuff. It is an hour and 26 minutes in. I'm gonna shut up now. You are your own one-man metaphorical personal bomb squad, and you can defuse situations before they happen. You are amazing and awesome, and I know that I'm amazing and awesome because I answer myself sometimes. You answer yourself in your brain all the time, and the people talk to themselves constantly to be able to understand certain things. Obviously, I shouldn't write all this stuff down, and that's what I'm not doing. I'm not writing stuff down. So that's what I'm not doing. Alright, a lot of times people don't realize that even if you don't write something down, you can still pull it, I guess, out and be able to manipulate people's stuff, but understandably so, they don't realize what people can do. And they don't realize what I can do because I don't ever try it, because I'm not a dumbass. I don't try to hurt people. I try to make people understand that their lives are important. And a lot of times when people get up from something, they don't realize that sometimes they really don't get things. They really don't get it at all. They just don't understand it. And a lot of times people need to understand, though, that there are a lot of people out there that help and care, and there are a lot of people out there that really, really want people to succeed, and realize there is no gateway to success. There's no gateway. It's always there. It's always there waiting for you to be able to hold on to, and to be able to understand something, to be able to understand that if there's a next time, if there ever was a next time, if there will ever be a next time, you'll be the one that everyone understands and realizes. So be there for yourself, and be there for whoever you care about, because if you don't care, then a lot of times neither do they. But realize that certain situations happen because of people's involvement of things, and if you're there, and if you're in a situation to where things get out of control, then realize that all you have to do is step away and walk away and go home. Be yourself, and understand certain situations that happen, and you really are your own one-man personal metaphorical bomb squad, and really understand those things.
If you're wondering what's going on here, I can help.
All right, be yourself, and have a good day.